All right, everybody. Good morning. It's good to see everybody out, and I say that because that's sort of the reflex that I say. Obviously, I'm not. Well, I probably just left when it comes down to it. This is really confusing. This is sort of like watching Back to the Future. You can get really confused as to what's happening in the timeline with all these things when you're recording something for the future. But let me start off by saying Happy Mother's Day. For the mothers that are here today, thank you so much for all that you've done. Thank you so much for all that you do in the care and support of your families. I trust that you will have a enjoyable and memorable day. And I suspect if your day looks anything like I expect my household to look like today, you shouldn't be planning on doing anything, right? That's kind of the expectation in my household on Mother's Day. If I didn't tell you last week, and this is just me stalling a little bit in case there's a few people that are trickling in here as we get started, I am not here today because of an invitation. I was invited by my mother-in-law to speak at the church that Trace grew up in, and she asked me several weeks ago, and this is way before Easter, and I was more than happy to do it. I didn't really know when it was going to happen, and so different things were going on. And a few weeks ago, I said, "Hey, I haven't forgotten about you, but I'm happy to come out sometime. Let me know what's available." Right now, I was going to be preaching at our church on May 3rd, and she said, "Well, if you're doing that, come on out to our church on May 10th." And I'm like, all right, that makes sense to me. What I didn't realize at the time is that May 10th was Mother's Day. And what I also didn't realize at the time is that Trace was serving on the worship team and she would not be able to go with me. So I reached out to my mother-in-law earlier this week, and I thought, well, maybe I can get out of this. Maybe there's a way I can I can dodge this for another week or two. And I said, hey, you still planning on me coming out on the 10th? She said, oh yes, we're looking forward to having you here. Your name has been in the bulletin. And I said, well, just so you know, it looks like it's just going to be me. Trace is on the worship team, so it looks like it'll just be me coming out. And I kind of expected that wouldn't quite cut it. I kind of expected that, well, if Trace can't come, don't bother showing up. But that was not the response that I got. It was, hey, we're very much looking forward to having you here with us on Sunday the 10th. So at this point, I should be in transit to Centerville, Pennsylvania, to be able to share a Mother's Day lesson with that congregation. So those of you that are inclined to, a quick prayer on my behalf is very, very much appreciated. Today we're going to continue our study on biblical identity. This is such a big topic, such an important topic for us to look at, and today's lesson is just the next step. And I'll tell you, I'm sure I'll tell you this week after week after week. I don't know that there is a I don't know that there's an unimportant lesson, but this is the most important lesson that we've had to look at so far. In week one, we were introduced to the idea that identity comes from God, right? And last week, in week two, we talked about how your identity is intentional, that God intentionally has an identity for you. And today we're just going to take the next step in this progression. Today, we're going to look at the relationship between identity and performance. And perhaps more importantly, we need to take into consideration who we are when we're not producing, right? When we're not performing. And this is something that is of such critical importance. This is something that matters so much. And it may matter more than what we realize before it's all said and done. And that's because so many people have quietly tied their identity to their work or to their usefulness, to their productivity, towards the role that they or the office that they fill. What it is that they do. Some people are very much connected to the accomplishments that they've made, right, or that they're making. And there's times when those things can be shaken, right? There's times when the accomplishments go away, or there's times when the productivity falls, or there's times when perhaps you find yourself in a situation where you don't feel all that useful. And when those things happen, it's very, very possible for your identity to be shaken as well. So we're going to start out today with a question. And the question is this: if somebody asked you to describe yourself, how would you answer it? Right? If I said to you, how would you describe yourself? What are some of the things that you would say? And I'll give you a moment just to think about that, and I would encourage you to be jotting down what are some things that you would say. Those of you that are inclined, and if you have my cell phone number, feel free to text me. What are some of those things that you would say about yourself? Right? What are some of those things? Or consider this. Consider if you were going to introduce somebody to somebody else, what would you say about them? How would you introduce someone? So for me, I may say something like, oh, I'm a pharmacist, or I'm a teacher, I'm a dad, I'm a brother. Um, I work in healthcare. I do these different things, right? There may be some things like that we would use to describe ourselves. But what I would encourage you to do is to look at those words. And I want you just to notice which one of those, or which of those words that you use, that we would describe ourselves to others by what we do, or we would describe, we would, if we were going to introduce somebody, we would use words that would describe what they do. Right. And that's a very common thing. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it. But what happens when you can't do those things anymore? Right? Because there's times that stuff like that happens. I'm going to go off script here. I had a coworker, one of my first partners, whenever I was working the stores in Erie, and think the world of him. He always had a way of sharpening iron with me. I would have sort of an opinion or an attitude towards something, and I, there's part of me that I think he did this just for fun. I think he liked to antagonize me for fun, but he would try to get me to at least try to see the other point of view. The reality of it is that he did some things, and as a result, he was outside of policy, and he was let go, and he was not working for several months, which was fine at first because his wife was a school teacher. His wife was a school teacher and had the summer off. As memory serves, and sort of ironic as I'm just thinking about this, he was fired Mother's Day weekend that year. I don't know if it was the Friday before or the Monday after, but that's when he was done, and quickly came to the end of the school year, and so he was able to spend the entire summer with his wife doing things, and they were sort of having a good time. But it was getting into November, and he was now looking for a new job. And I remember him calling me. I was in Washington D.C., and he called me, and he was alarmed. He's like, "I got a job interview," but he's like, "This is the only thing I can do." He had so connected, and I can see this in hindsight. I don't know that I saw this as easily in the moment, but he had tied his identity to the limited things that he did in his work life. I remember the conversation we were talking about. Well, you have many skills beyond just what you see there, but he was so limiting himself, and because he wasn't doing those things, he was shook, and he was like, what if they don't like what I can do? Right? He was really, really worked up about that. And I share that story with you because I think it's appropriate because there's times that we go through different changes. Maybe it's a retirement, maybe it's a job loss, like my friend, right? Maybe there's an injury. Some of you know that my grandfather had an accident and he lost his left arm at the elbow. You know that changed his life as a young man. He had to go through life doing things with one arm that other people had too. In the world today, there's so much talk about burnout, right? The frustrations at work, or things like that happen, and or you may just find yourself in a season of transition. When these disruptions come, what happens then? And I ask that because many people discover at these times that they have connected their identity to production, right? They have tied their identity to what they have done, and then when they aren't producing anymore, well, that becomes troubling, right? That becomes a challenge. Now, before we go further, I'm going to see if I'm going to try to use technology to our benefit here, but I'm going to share with you this framework, and I think this is on the screen now, but you should see the right order and the wrong order, right? We have this framework that we're using and developing over the course of this study, that shows us where identity comes from. In the right order, the way that right now we're saying this is what we want to subscribe to, is that we need to recognize that our identity comes first, and from that identity comes self-worth, and from that comes our self-image, and ultimately there comes a behavior. But there are so many people in the world, and I know I've been in this bucket. I may be in this bucket right now. This is why this study is so important, where it's the performance that impacts our self-esteem, and our self-esteem impacts our self-worth, and as such, that is used to define our identity. You know, most people, I think, if you start to tune in, I think you're going to find that most people are trying to perform their way into an identity. But let's not lose sight that God designed this the other way around. The identity comes first, and when the identity comes first, everything else flows from it. As I was working up this part of the lesson, I got to thinking, and I think I taught this phrase, when I taught the law of intentionality, any of the number of times that I've taught the law of intentionality. But in that law, in that lesson, I use this phrase that we're more likely to act our way into a feeling than to feel our way into an action. And that's a wonderful thing to get us to be intentional and to do something that maybe we don't really feel like doing. But I was thinking about how that phrase, maybe that fits as we look at identity. So I want to give you something that it's not finished, and I reserve the right to throw it away before we're all said and done. But I think there may be something here that when it comes to identity, perhaps we can use an adjustment of this phrase. Perhaps when it comes to identity, we should be our identity. We should be our way into an action and not act our way into a being. Because when it comes down to it, we've acted ourselves into all sorts of beings over the years. Today's lesson really is going to challenge us to look at the conflict between this right order and this wrong order of identity that exists here in the world. And so, with that, I think it's important. And I lost my notes. Let me get back to my notes here. I think it's important that we can look at the life of Jesus. And there's something here that I want you to see, because once you see this, you're never going to be able to unsee it. You're not going to be able to unsee it. So I'm going to invite you to turn with me to the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew chapter 3, we're going to go from verse 13 to verse 17. Matthew 3:13 through 17. This is the story of the baptism of Jesus. The story goes, then Jesus came from Galilee to the Jordan to be baptized by John. But John tried to defer him, saying, I need to be baptized by you, and do you come to me? In verse 15 says, Jesus replied, let it be so now. It is proper for us to do this to fulfill all righteousness. And then John consented. as soon as Jesus was baptized, he went up out of the water, and at that moment heaven was opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending on him like a dove, and a light on him. And a voice from heaven said, and if those of you that are underliners, highlighters, circlers, whatever it is, I can't encourage you enough. Check out this verse, verse 17. The voice from heaven says, "This is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased." You've probably heard that before. This is not the first time you have heard that. It's not the first time you've heard that phrase. It's probably not the first time you've heard that story. But I want you to slow down here and pay attention to where are we at in the life of Jesus. Like up to this point, what had Jesus done? Yeah, and I'm going to tell you, at this moment, Jesus has not walked on the water. Jesus has not calmed the storm. Jesus has not healed the blind. He has not fed the thousands. He has not preached the Sermon on the Mount. He has not raised Lazarus from the dead. He has not gone to the cross. He has not raised from the dead himself. Don't miss this. Don't miss this. He had done none of this. Yet when he comes up out of the water, this voice from heaven, God himself says, "This is my son whom I love. With him I am well pleased." And this feeds into this right model of identity that we're looking at, right? God had defined Jesus' identity before Jesus ever began his ministry. Before the miracles, before the crowds, before the accomplishments, before all these notable things, I want you not to miss Jesus' identity came first. Now, we need to take that and we need to compare this to how most people live today. You see, the world system tells us that we need to perform, we need to go out, we need to perform, we need to produce, we need to do something first. And then on the other side of doing that, then the approval comes, then the recognition, then the identity comes. Produce first, earn value, accomplish first, then you matter. But God's system, it's different. It is different. God gives identity first. And then when we have that identity in the right place, when we look at that identity, the behaviors flow from identity. Identity produces behaviors. Now, I tell you this, and what I do not want you to hear. I don't want you to hear that performance doesn't matter. I think performance absolutely matters. I think it matters to I think it actually matters to a higher level for believers than it matters for non-believers. Right? I think it's such an important thing, but we need to make sure that we understand the order of things. We need to understand that responsibility matters, that stewardship matters, that excellence matters. But performance is supposed to flow from identity, not create identity. So while performance may reveal identity, um, I want you to make sure we recognize that it cannot create identity, or the identities that performance that people think performance shows for them. Those can be false identities. And when your identity comes from performance, when those performances fail, when those things start to fall apart, when things are knocked off balance, your identity you become terrified, just like my colleague all those years ago. Because when when stuff like that happens, then failure becomes failure becomes part of who you think you are, right? We try to internalize, and I suspect you know people like this. Maybe it even describes you at some point, right? Because when you experience failure, and we all experience failure, part of that then means I'm a failure, right? Or we take that too, we take that too personally when we have our frameworks backwards. And I want you to be so cautious if you've ever had that thought before, because a dangerous, that's such a dangerous thought. It kind of suggests that somehow that God made something that wasn't perfect. That God made something that wasn't intentional or that wasn't delightful to him, right? Let's go back. We've been looking at the story of Joseph the last couple of weeks. If we go back to the story of Joseph, and I want you to keep that framework in mind. Let me actually put that framework back up on the screen. Maybe that'd be helpful. You'd probably rather look at the framework than look at me. Um, but if we look at this, Joseph's value did not begin in the palace. Joseph had value way before the palace. He already had identity before success ever showed up publicly. Now, when he got to the palace revealed some things, but the palace did not make him who he was. That had happened before. A few weeks ago, in the week before we started this study, Brother Bob gave us a lesson on identity, and I'm going to do my best to catch up because it was such a good lesson. But one of the examples that he used was the story of Gideon, right? Same is true for Gideon. When God appears to Gideon, he identifies Gideon as a mighty warrior before this guy had ever fought a battle, before he had won a battle. Gideon couldn't see it because it hadn't happened yet. And there's this story from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 16. If you want to turn to it, what I want you to focus on is Matthew 16:17. But what we have is Jesus is asking his disciples, "Hey, who do you say I am?" And Peter correctly identifies Jesus as the Messiah. And in verse 17, the scripture reads, Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven." Verse 18, "And I tell you that you are Peter." He changes his name from Simon to Peter. "And on this rock," and if for those of you that have a Bible with footnotes, I would hazard a guess that you have a footnote right there. And if you follow that footnote, there's something that says in Greek, Peter means rock, right? And on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. Jesus gives Simon the new name of Peter, and he gives him this name of strength and stability. And if we were to study Peter at this point, we're not going to take that tangent, but if you want to take the tangent, by all means, by all means, go check this out. I think if you look at Peter's life up to this point, you would be hard pressed to look at this guy and say stability, right? His performance to this point did not scream solid guy, right? And as you continue to study Peter's life, you're not going to think that for a while yet, right? We know what happens at the crucifixion. So I want to encourage you. For those of you who are note takers, you may want to take this note. God often speaks identity before performance catches up. God speaks identity before performance catches up. And that's completely consistent with our model. That's completely consistent with our model. Now, let's bring this back. Let's bring this back into our world because this conflict with identity shows up everywhere. These conflicting models show up everywhere. And I'm going to suggest to you that because we have these conflicts, this is why people overwork. This is why people burn out. This is why people can't rest. This is why people feel failure or have this fear of failure. This is why so many people struggle with comparison. This is so many people who struggle with the need for constant approval. Those of you on social media, have you ever posted something and like not been disappointed with the number of likes or engagements with whatever you've posted? Right? That's an identity thing right there. Because what that is that's tying identity to performance. And when those things uh, when those things don't show up, then that's a threat. That's a threatening feeling, right? That challenges how you see yourself. I had mentioned, I think a couple of weeks ago that I had been thinking about taking some time off for some time. That I was thinking that I would really benefit for being away for about a month if I could figure out how to do it. But there was part of me that really struggled with that. There was part of me that struggled with that so much because I had developed this mindset that I should be serving in some way. I would tell you that I've even heard others in our church say that. I'm not going to tell you who that was, but I'm going to tell you this. I think this is a common mindset that we have, right? That they say, well, if I'm there, I should be doing something, right? And whenever I hear these things, and even probably when I've said these things, I probably intended it in or I heard it or interpreted it in a noble way, right? Oh, that's a pretty noble thing to be doing. But I think if and I'll speak for myself, there's some identity wrapped up with that, right? There's some performance wrapped up with that. And then I had the courage to step away for a month, 4 weeks, and something really interesting happened. The world didn't fall apart, the building didn't burn down. When I did that, when I decided to step away, um, imagination and creativity showed up. That that was interesting. Um, Other people stepped in and taught, and they taught well. They taught so well. I was able to gain some different perspectives. I was able to learn some things that I never would have learned otherwise. People grew, and people kept growing. Um, I grew. I knew that. I think overall our group benefited from that. And then one of the things that I realized is this. Sometimes when we refuse to rest, we stand in the way of the development of others. Sometimes when we refuse to rest, we stand in the way of the development of others. And this reminded me of something that I went through during my time at Rite Aid. I'd become very intentional about developing my team, and now I have this team who's growing and they're getting better. And then I recognize that they're growing so fast, and I'm in their way. I'm in their way. If I was to stay in the role that I was in, then I was actually doing them a disservice because I was going to become a limitation to them. I needed to get out of the way so that each person on the team could continue to grow, they could continue to mature, they could continue becoming all it is that they could be. And that really struck me at the time. Those of you those of you who are note takers, I would encourage you to consider taking this note. A healthy identity empowers others. And I'll say it again. A healthy identity empowers others. It doesn't depower, it doesn't bring dependence. Healthy identity creates room for multiplication. What does God tell us to do? What's God math? He says be fruitful and multiply, right? But sometimes our inability to rest, if that's rooted in our identity, if we have these models backwards, then if my identity is tied to my production, then if I take this mindset that if I rest, then that's a loss, right? Um, and I think this is something, and I'm not to this point yet. It's just so this is a hypothesis. I welcome feedback on this, but I think this is why some people really struggle with seasons like retirement because their identity has been wrapped up in something else for all so long. This is why people struggle with job loss. This is why people struggle with illness or injury, or they're going through some transition in life, a move, whatever it is. It's It's not just about losing income or having your routine disrupted, but it's this thought that I no longer know who I am because I so associated myself with what had been being produced before. And and maybe someone here today is in a season where maybe you feel unproductive or you feel uncertain or you feel confused or you feel like you're on the sidelines. I want to say this to you carefully and clearly, which is something for a guy who stutters, right? But I want you to hear this. If you're going through one of these challenging times, your identity has not disappeared. Now, your identity hasn't disappeared. I know I'm not in the room, but I really need you to do this. And maybe it's not for you, maybe it's for the person next to you. I need you to look at your neighbor. I need you to look at your neighbor. I need you to tell your neighbor your identity doesn't disappear. Who God made you to be hasn't gone away. Hasn't gone away. And you know what? It doesn't go away. Doesn't go away. Your value is not suspended when your productivity declines or is lost. No, that's not the way it works. So I need to ask you a few questions. These are questions that I want you to reflect on. Maybe you just write these down for now, but I want you to think about what makes you feel valuable. What makes you feel valuable, or when do you feel the best about yourself? Is there is there some role or title that would be very, very difficult for you to lose? If that title or if that role went away, that'd be a really terrible thing for you. I think this is one of those questions that I struggle with. Can you rest without feeling guilty? Now, that's not to say that you don't rest, but when you do rest, does that make you feel bad? Right? Because that's kind of where I find myself with I find myself in that place more frequently than I like. Right? When we consider those questions, I think those questions will reveal to us more about our identity than we realize. So I have a couple of statements. I'm going to put a new slide up on the board. Or I'm going to try to put a new slide up on the board or up on the screen with what we're doing here. You might tell me, Jess, I love when you teach this way. I love when you're not in the room. That that may be something that comes out of this. I don't know. We'll see. But I'm gonna scroll this up, so we're gonna get to a new list here. But I want to give you a few statements to hold on to this week. And you know, if you want to take a screenshot of this, whatever, get your phone out, take a picture. Don't care how it is, but I want you to dwell on these. I think these are some of the key points from our lesson today. What you do is not who you are. What you do is not who you are. Don't ever forget that God gives identity before he gives us the assignment. And while performance may reveal or reflect our identity, it doesn't create it, right? Your your value is not suspended when your productivity is. And a healthy identity empowers others. And you know, and I think this is gonna be one of the key takeaways. This is gonna be hard, really hard for me to forget. This is gonna be one, like I said, this is gonna be really difficult to unsee. Jesus or God didn't tell Jesus that he loved him after the miracles. He told him that before, right? And I think that is so wonderful. I think that is so powerful as we as we look at this. So here's your challenge this week. I want you to turn your radar up on where you are deriving your value from. Where is it that you're taking your value from? You know, pay attention because I'm suspicious that a lot of us, myself included, maybe at the front of the line, right? We derive our value from what we produce, right? We have this crippling feel of fear of failure, right? We struggle to rest or rest appropriately. Sometimes we have restless rest. I think that's a real thing. Um, Pay attention to your need for approval, right? And that's something that I'm getting a lot better at. I'm getting a lot better at not caring as much about what people say. Right. Now it's not to say that I haven't listened to that before. It's not to say that it hasn't had my ear before, but I want to encourage you to pay attention to those things. So pay attention to your need to produce, pay attention to your fear of failure, pay attention to your inability to rest, and pay attention to your need for approval. Because one of the enemy's favorite strategies is to convince people that their value rises and falls with their usefulness. That's what's one of the enemy's favorite strategies is to get you to buy in to that wrong philosophy, to that wrong model, to that wrong flow on how identity is. And I want you to not forget that before Jesus did anything publicly, God had already told him that he loved him. This is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. And as we and this is a journey. This is why this is going to take us months and months and months as we go through this study of identity. We need to learn how to live from identity instead of trying to strive for identity. And I don't know. I think this may be maybe even more uniquely an American problem that the church faces, but this is where we're going to continue to go. So, week one of our study, we talked about how identity comes from God. Week two of our study said that our identity is it's an intentional assignment from God. And we're going to get into purpose before too much longer here. And that'll come at the appropriate time. Today, what I want to make sure that you leave with is that your identity comes before performance. Next week, we're going to continue our study on identity. I look forward to seeing you back in person. For those of you who are, this is really a cool thing. I actually have a clock here showing how long my thing's been running. I probably teach faster in this format because it looks like right now we're about 40 minutes. But if and this video is going to be posted because you're going to be watching it live in class. But we record these and we put them up so that you can watch them again or you can share them. I'll encourage you to if you're finding value from this, take a moment, watch it again. Don't count on getting everything the first time through. Sometimes you got to go through it a second, third, fourth time, whatever it is, to really pick up or to have some of this stuff sink in. But I want to encourage you next week. Look forward to seeing you back. I want to encourage you that if you're finding value with this, share one of these lessons with somebody else and invite them to join us. Or even if you have a colleague or a family member, whoever that's far away, share these. Share this with somebody who needs to be encouraged. Share this with somebody who may be under the enemy's attack on their identity. With that, I'm going to close here for today. I'm going to send it back to the room for our wrap up. So thank you all so much. Appreciate you being here, and we'll see you next week.